we'd like to make a boomerang so we can put it on our social media. So what I would ask is if I just stop sharing the presentation for a moment so we can all be on the screen together. Is I would ask Christina, who's here with us, to just make a short recording of all of us. So if you want to put your video on, if you don't, that's fine too, but if you do, that would be great. And move around a bit or do something fun. And that will then form part of the boomerang that we will post later on, that hopefully you'll see. So, Christina, will you give me a thumbs up when we're ready to go? All right. Here we go.
Perfect.
I must admit, this is the first time I've done this kind of thing, and I feel a little bit awkward sitting alone in the office and waving my arms around, but there we go. Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone. I see that the recording has started. Thank you for still being here with us for that. If there's anyone who's joined after we mentioned that, there's just a quick note to say that the session is being recorded. Yeah, it'll be posted later on, so you can also come back to it if you'd like to. And could I also ask everyone who's joined to put yourselves on mute so we don't have any echo in the background as we go through? That's great, thank you very much. So I'll just put the presentation back on and let's get started. All right, so maybe just a couple of words about what we want to talk about today. We want to say why diversity and inclusion matter to us. Well, a little bit about what they are, first of all, but why they matter to us personally and why we've decided to make a career in this area. Something about our team and the work that we do. We'd like to share with you some of the external projects that we have going on and some of the services that we offer to clients around this area and what businesses, what companies are doing in the area of diversity and inclusion to try to take it seriously and live the values, let's say, that they advertise and that they state for themselves. Then a little bit about how we put diversity and inclusion in practice at PwC, right? Because although we work a lot with clients, we need to also make sure that we're walking the talk, if I can put it that way, internally, that we have some kind of credibility, right? And then to look a little bit about how diversity and inclusion could apply in your context as someone who's at university or entering the workforce.
So you might wonder, what do we actually talk about when we talk about diversity? And the diversity kind of answers the question of what. So what is our workforce made of, or what is our society made of? And here we really talk about all these different facets of ourselves and of the people around us that make them individual. And of course, there are many. It goes far beyond gender or nationality. We can also, of course, talk about our educational background, our social background, our religion, our culture. So there are many, many things that make us diverse. And we call this, or we like to not only talk about diversity, but we usually link them. So we really like to talk about diversity and inclusion together. So inclusion is the how. So how do we make diversity thrive? Because if we just have a very diverse workforce or a diverse society without any inclusion, we will probably not unlock the potential of the people that are in our team or in our society. So this is really a lot about culture and about behavior and about well, bringing out the potential in the diverse perspective and backgrounds that the people have make up our workforce or our society.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to remember. Exactly. Thanks, Lydia. That it's great to say, you know, if you have a lot of people from very different backgrounds, then they have very different ideas or different ways of doing things. And sure, that has a positive side, which is very strong, but also there's a great potential for misunderstanding, right? Or not being able to work together properly. So the inclusive behaviors that we can exhibit are a way of reducing the bad side of that or reducing the potential downside and getting the best out of it too.
So we would be really curious to get your opinion on this as well. and we will try out something. Ideally, take your smartphone, but of course, you can also just add a second tab in your browser and go to menti.com. And then you will see that you can enter a code. And with that code, you can answer a question, and we will look at the results together. So please go to menti.com now.
In case you have any issues, you can always let us know in the chat and we can help you out.
Okay, I already see a lot of answers coming in. No worries, your answers are anonymous. I will share some incoming answers, but you still have time to put in your answer. And in case for whatever reason it doesn't work for you, it's not such a big problem. It's maybe a little less fun to follow our presentation, but you can still see all the things we do and discuss. Alex, can you see my screen well?
Yes, I can. And we're seeing some live updates coming in as people continue to answer the questions. I guess maybe it makes a difference if you can already see what everyone else is asking when you make your choice. But it seems we have a couple of relatively clear winners. Not exactly the ones that I expected, I must admit. It seems the most popular answer is that knowing how we differ lets us get the best out of everyone. So somehow a pragmatic point of view, I suppose, but also one which has a focus on, all right, I want to be able to give my own best as well. So if we have a system that allows for that, that's good for me and it's good for you. And then in a pretty close second, the moral responsibility. That's a strong argument. I think one of the arguments for diversity and inclusion that gets a lot of maybe time and is talked about one perhaps the most is about it's just the right thing to do, right? To treat each other fairly and without discrimination. I'm not sure there are so many people who would disagree with that, but you never know.
I guess the tricky thing here is a little bit that you could just choose one answer, because I bet a lot of people would have liked to choose 2 or 3. Also, yeah, because the last answer option didn't get any votes, although I guess it's quite relevant for many of us.
I guess that's part of the experience of being the last in the list of answers, right?
Maybe. Okay, I think everyone has answered. So, Alex, do you want to go back to our presentation?
Absolutely. Very good. So we also wanted to give our own point of view a little bit on those 5 answers that we put forward. We find those to be perhaps the 5 most insightful or the most resonant with us. Well, that first of all, diversity is just a reality, right? Maybe 15, 20 years ago, companies could choose whether they care about it or not. But at this point, not only are we so connected with social media and so visible, everything that we do, any mistakes that we make as a person or a company are so visible on social media and even in mainstream media. But also, we're also mobile, that it doesn't really matter almost, well, maybe that's putting it a bit too strongly, but it almost doesn't matter where you're from or where you're born when you make the decision of where you want to end up or where you want to live. Maybe that's a bit of a Eurocentric perspective, but there is, I think, something to it. As we talked about before, I mean, there's an element of it being the right thing to do. And sometimes you might hear the claim made that, you know, focusing on diversity and trying to leverage diversity and include everyone is somehow against merit. It's against meritocracy, right? Because we're just looking for the best people for the job, and why should we care about what their background is? But actually we find, and research backs this up, that if you're able to get the best out of everybody by putting them in an environment where they can showcase their strengths and use their strengths productively without having barriers put up or being penalized for their strengths, then it actually does support the idea of a meritocracy, and it helps to realize potential of an organization, of a society, and of individuals too. As a result, you get better business results if you have people who are motivated and able to share their ideas without being afraid of being shouted down or something like that. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's about the society that we make around us, and it's about the kind of society that you want to live in. right? And what kind of treatment you can expect if you ever end up being in a minority, essentially. So maybe just a few words about us and what makes us a little bit, what makes us different from each other and different from others. So my name's Alex. My surname is Polish, as some of you might have noticed, but I grew up in New Zealand, as maybe some of you noticed from my quickly fading accent. I have a background in accounting and finance, studied in the UK. Now obviously live in Switzerland with my wonderful wife, who is a musician. And just this year, we were back in New Zealand a month before the lockdown. That's the photo at the bottom. We love to travel, and I love to go there to see my family, despite the 20-hour time investment you need to make to get there. Lydia, how about you?
So my name is Lydia Walter. I'm in Alex's team in PwC Switzerland. I'm originally from Austria, but I studied in the Netherlands because I was very much interested in international relations. And that interest basically came from me working first as a flight attendant for Swiss Airlines, made me very curious about diplomacy and international economic relations and international law as well. And after my bachelor's, I had the chance to work at the UN in New York for a while, and also to work on an education project where I, well, basically you can see my kids on this photo. So I was a head teacher and working in a program for educational equality in Austria. And I'm generally very interested in topics of equality, so be it gender equality or also social equality. And that's why I decided to do a master in human rights. And I did that in Paris. And afterwards, I joined PwC Switzerland here in Zurich. And that was in March, actually. I joined the firm on the day of the lockdown, so 16th of March, which was an interesting start. So here you can see our team. You can see that we have a lot of different nationalities here and many different native languages being spoken. And I think what makes it really interesting and fun and inspiring to work in such a team is that we are extremely diverse in terms of nationalities, experience, but also educational background. And that really fits well with what we do, because it's a bit hard to say in a nutshell what we do. I tried to figure that out in my job interviews with PwC, and I tried to have people explain to me what a typical work week would look like, or what the main tasks are that would await me if I accepted this position. And it was a bit, almost impossible to get some concrete information. And that's because the projects we have are quite diverse. And that's why we need all these very diverse backgrounds as well. So we have statisticians who do the data analytics. We have people who are more on the culture and psychology side. So we have also psychology here, a psychologist, and we have people who do audits. We often discuss also very sensitive topics with employees on their firm culture, for example. And so we are experts in our own field, but what makes our work also very interesting and fascinating is that we get a little glimpse into what everyone else does, and into a wide variety of tasks that you think you're maybe not entirely qualified for, but then you have a very steep learning curve and you get some very interesting insights. And anything to add here to our team, Alex?
No, I think that was very well put, that there is no such thing as a typical week in our team, apart from it being completely unpredictable, because we do so many different things, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that definitely keeps it exciting. One of the main things we do is we offer organizations the chance to test whether they really do pay their employees equally for equal work. So you might think, well, I mean, we can talk about maybe an overall gap in average salaries because people are differently distributed. Maybe you have lots of men in the senior positions and lots of women maybe in less paid positions or something like that. But of course, everyone pays equally for equal work, right? Because it's illegal if you don't do that. So surely this is a problem that's already solved, you might think. So we have here a bit of a Menti quiz, right, Lydia? So if you go back to Menti, you have the code again in the top right. We have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, and if you're still logged in, you can basically use the same details you used before. I already see a lot of you joining with their funny icons. This looks so cute. Wait, I'm gonna share the screen.
I think this is your favorite part of this webcast, right, Lydia?
Yeah, I love this. Can you see?
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Okay, let's wait for another moment to see, to give everyone a chance to join. I see still people are joining.
The suspense is killing me.
Okay, one more person.
There they are.
Okay, still more. Okay. Shall we start the quiz?
Let's do it.
Okay, I see we have 12 right answers. That's really
Good.
great, given the very
Paying attention.
short amount of time you had. Let's see who is leading this question. So, okay, Tom has the most points, both because he took the right answer and he was fastest, closely followed by Mars and Zero. So let's move on to the next question. Okay. Let's see. Everyone has voted. Great. Oh, wow. Okay. The great
Very good.
majority has picked the right answer here. Let's see who is leading now. The board. Okay. Then next question. Okay, here, yeah, we have a bit less of a clear result.
I see the strategy of going for the answer in the middle didn't pay off this time.
Yeah. We will not go into the detail of the answers of these questions as of now, because we will talk a little bit later about, well, basically the challenges behind equal pay gap and gender pay gaps and so on. So if you agree, we will just leave it with this now. And yeah, very happy to go a bit more into detail later, and also in our Q&A to pick up the questions you might have, because it's a fascinating and complicated topic. And I see we have, okay, we have now Janice in the lead.
Vision was a bit of a differentiator, it seems.
Yeah, So last question, last chance to win this. So
which
we're
of these
looking for
countries is not?
Yeah, for the country that is not, exactly. Okay, yeah, we have kind of foresaw that because it's quite surprising that Switzerland, yeah, wouldn't be in the top 5. Actually, Sweden is in the top 4, and Nicaragua on 5, and Switzerland, what was it, Alex? 14 or 18?
18.
18. Yeah.
So pushing the top 15, I would say. Not quite there.
And here we can see the results again.
The moment of truth. HEIBEX #1. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Fantastic. Okay, Alex, shall we go back to the presentation?
Absolutely. Very good. So we touched a bit on the topics that we want to talk about now, but very happy to give you a bit more detail, particularly about that gender gap versus equal pay gap topic. So in answer to this question, actually, as you saw, the wage gap, the wage gap which is not based on explainable factors. So the unexplainable wage gap is around 8% in Switzerland. What do we mean by that? Well, if you just calculate the overall average pay for men and the average pay for women in Switzerland, it was the 18% figure that we saw before. There's a gap in favor of men. But there, of course, I mean, if there's a difference in distribution of men and women on senior and less senior positions, then that has a big impact on the average pay that you have per gender. But Switzerland also has done an analysis. The Federal Office for Gender Equality has done an analysis and found that even if we consider the level of the job that you're in, the educational background that you have, the function that you work in, so your department, even if you take all of those out of the model and you account for them, you still end up with this 8% gap between the genders, which can't be explained by any of those factors. So in fact, it seems not to be the case that equal pay for equal work, because it's legally mandated, of course it's a reality, it's not quite there. And you can see that here on the slide, that this 18% gender pay gap, which is found when we look at the average wages per month of men and women. After that second analysis, they found that about 56% could be explained by those factors we talked about, and the rest, they just have no idea. It's a gap which we cannot explain it with our data. So that's a bit why we work in this topic, and we're interested in the topic, because clearly it's not yet resolved. So what do? Well, we offer a way for organizations to put themselves to the test and to really prove, if it is the case, that they pay their employees equally for equal work. If they pass through our rigorous analysis and audit, which I'll talk about in a minute, then they become the proud owners, let's say, of an equal salary certificate from a foundation that we work with that actually designed this methodology, which says essentially that they've proven that indeed they are an equal pay employer. And you can see here a couple on the slide, maybe it's a little bit small on the one that's being shared, but Ferrari in Italy and the US have recently gone through the process. We've got a number of other brands. We've got Migros in there. UBS has gone through in Switzerland and gained this certification. So this is a way for only those organizations that genuinely deserve it to be recognized for the fact that actually they've taken the time and put in the work to make sure that they're paying their employees equally for equal work. Now, how do we actually measure that? We do that in 2 phases, right? Because for us, it's not enough just to look at pay, just to look at, all right, if you tell us now in the end of October 2020, what everyone is paid, and it seems okay, and that the gap is not too big, that's not enough for us, because there's no guarantee there that next year with a new chief executive or just with new hires and people leaving, that you won't have a problem unless you're really taking care to pay attention to it. So that's why we have two phases where we look, number one, from a quantitative perspective, are your salaries equal now for equal work? That's number one. Number two, we check what is the system that you have in place in your organization. So when you're hiring, when you're setting people's pay, when you're giving pay increases, when you're giving performance ratings, when you're choosing who gets promoted or not, what's the system that you have in place to make sure that this position of equality is maintained through all of those permutations, and that men and women and people who have differences in other characteristics which are not relevant to work, that they all have the same opportunity to advance their career in the organization. So maybe for those who are a little bit more statistically minded of you, the way we do phase one, the quantitative piece, is that we do a multiple linear regression. In other words, we want to understand, okay, if each employee has a pay that they get at the end of their month, what are the characteristics of those people and their jobs that makes them paid what they're paid, and explains why different people are paid differently. Those will be things like the grade they work in, the department they work in, maybe the educational background they have, or the time they spent at the company. And if we know all of these characteristics for each person in your organization, can we then measure what is left in terms of differences in pay, right? That's a little bit like the analysis we were talking about earlier, to remove all those explainable aspects of differences in grade or differences in education or whatever, and just see what's left. What this allows us to do is to give a single figure of unexplained gender gap for a company. And for us, if that's less than 5%, then we consider it to be good enough for them to pass into our audit phase, where we check, okay, what is it that you have in place to make sure that everything's equal? If it's more than that, then they cannot proceed. And then in phase two, what we do is we have quite a comprehensive review of all of their policies, but the more exciting piece that we do is to have interviews with their chief executive, with the head of HR, working sessions with their HR team to really grill them on, all right, in this policy, you say that you do X, you say that you do Y. How do you make sure that your line managers are doing that? How do you make sure that people follow the policy and know where it is? We speak to managers who are supposed to be responsible for implementing these policies and ask them, well, how do you make your promotion decisions? How do you make sure that you're not biased in terms of who you're giving this performance rating to versus another one? And we speak to employees who are the ones who are experiencing what it's like to work in the company and ask about, have you had any experience of harassment? If it did happen, what do you do about it? Do you know who you can speak to? Would you feel comfortable to speak to your manager about this kind of thing? And what is the organization communicating about equality, about inclusion, about diversity that you actually see and that you actually believe, right? So what does it feel like genuinely to work there? And bringing all that evidence together, we assess them against a set of requirements and finally decide whether they're ready or not to receive the certificate. I think this goes back to what, Lydia, you were saying, that there are so many different types of things that we do, and yet it's all under this one umbrella of making sure that if an organization says they pay equally and they want to prove it, that they really have to prove it. They really need to put the effort in and make sure that they pass our rather rigorous test.
Okay, so Alex talked a little bit about what we do in terms of equal pay and gender pay gap. And kind of the second branch of the projects we deliver revolves around diversity and inclusion more generally. And well, we like to also, when we work with clients, to look a little bit at this slide, because it gives representation of the diversity that we see globally. And the idea behind looking at this is not only like, oh, this is interesting to look at the distribution, but also the argument that the workplace should reflect the world it operates in for the many reasons we've been discussing before. So it's good for the business, it's the right thing to do, not to exclude anyone, and so on and so forth. So basically the points we've seen before. And so how do they actually make this a reality? So which questions do firms have if they come to us and want to do a project with us, specifically related to diversity and inclusion? Maybe we can go to the next slide. So here are a couple of things that kind of summarize a little bit what we do. So the first one is we are very interested to look at diversity and inclusion along the employee life cycle. That's a bit the HR talk here. I was also confused about this. I was like, which life cycle? But it's basically describing everything that happens throughout the career of a person, from basically seeing a job ad to eventually maybe terminating the contract with the firm. And the idea is that an inclusive culture and the idea to have a diverse workforce shouldn't only happen at basically the main points. So, for example, at recruitment or at performance management, but also a lot of small steps that happen in between that really show if the company has an inclusive culture, basically. And so for firms that struggle with that, so for example, that struggle with women in top leadership, for example, they often argue, well, we don't have enough women in middle management to later maybe promote them to senior management. So then it's interesting for us to look at this and say, okay, what can we maybe do to look at the career pipeline and see where you lose your motivated and very highly qualified women, for example. So that would be, yeah, that's the first point. And then the second one is we look at inclusive culture more generally, and we assess with firms, for example, who want to do some cultural change, what they would be interested in. One major thing is inclusive leadership, of course, because the commitment and the role modeling has to come from the leadership. And there are many small things that leaders can do to embed an inclusive culture in their teams and in the organization. A second point would be we do trainings and workshops on preventing sexual harassment and discrimination. This is, well, it's very welcome for HR to bring in external experts where basically bring in an external perspective, and we make this quite interactive. So often we, for example, we discuss cases and we discuss how if the situation would qualify as harassment, for example, and how they would recognize it and how they can act on it. And the third important part of our training is on unconscious bias, because many times, well, we don't act on purpose or very consciously exclusionary. We act basically on our bias. Every one of us has stereotypes, and this makes us behave the way we do, but often our behavior is not really conducive to creating an inclusive atmosphere or culture. So for us, it's very interesting to look at, well, what bias might be there and how to recognize them and how to act on them. And a third part is other engagements that we do with firms and organizations we work with, is to really align diversity and inclusion with their business strategy, and to really make sure that the KPIs that measure success of their business are also aligned with diversity KPIs. And there we do a bit of research. You see some research results here. And for example, a recent PwC study has found that a team with members who share the client's ethnicity is, for example, 152% more likely to understand the client. So if a firm wants to operate, for example, in a specific region, it really makes sense for them in their teams to reflect the diversity of their customers and of their business partners, basically. Or when it's about attracting top talent, of course, an employer that sets an example and has a reputation of being an equal opportunity employer, well, has better chances to attract the best talent. Exactly. And one very important thing that we do is to look at the KPIs to measure progress along all these diversity and inclusion programs and endeavors, to make sure firms are on the right track with what they do, basically. Is there anything I missed? Alex, it's always so hard to talk about this broad range of projects and put it into a nutshell and kind of summarize.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's rare that we have two projects that are similar to each other, honestly speaking, because the needs that a company can have in terms of inclusion and diversity can be really broad. I mean, we have those, like you said, Lydia, that are recovering from a scandal, and they need to show improvement, and they need to win back the trust of their employees, or they need to win back their reputation somehow, and we can help them. And there are also those who are really good at it and are thinking, you know what, we have some budget now for D&I, we have a range of things we could do, which are the ones that we should choose that are probably going to be best for our bottom line and best for our financial results. So we have a really wide scale, and essentially we're brought in to figure out, for a specific problem, how do we bring our expertise and our knowledge on the subject and our experience from other clients to make a relevant assessment.
Exactly.
Well,
So
we'd like to hear from you here.
Yeah, we are curious to hear from you what matters for you with an employer, what you care about when you consider applying for a job with a specific organization or firm. So here you have the chance to go back into Menti and basically to rate 4 options. I will share again to let you see the incoming answers.
Yeah, so you'll be asked to essentially put them in an order from 1 to 4, how much they matter to you from your perspective.
Okay, we see first results coming in. Interesting. So with every additional person that answers, it will change a little bit again. And then, yeah, we will have the overall results in the end after everyone has answered.
We have a very aesthetically pleasing tie there right now. Not anymore. Okay, that's fine. Hey, look at that. Equality and fair treatment was leading for a moment. Now a tie between progressing your career and being treated fairly, making sure everyone else is being treated fairly too. Not so much love for the flexible work so far, it seems. There's a little bit of competition between whether salary is more important than flexibility at the bottom of the table there.
Would be interesting to do the same poll with the same group in 10 years, because I think it has also a little bit to do with age.
Yeah, it could be.
Because flexible work arrangements become probably more relevant once you consider having a family or, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think for now I would still pick equality and fair treatment as my number 1. But yeah, I don't have kids yet, so maybe that'll change.
So we have 11 answers so far. Let's wait a little longer if there's anyone else who would like to participate. Okay, I don't think so. Maybe Alex, you want to take over again?
Yep, here we go. And we can show what our research has said about that topic. So there was a really interesting study done actually by PwC in the UK, where I used to work, and PwC in the US, which showed that the top 3 factors that make an organization an attractive employer are in a bit of a different order, depending on your gender, which was quite an interesting finding. That for men, opportunities for career progression tended to be number 1, whereas for women that would be number 3. This was out of a series of 13 options, so these 3 were the top 3 for both genders. But flexible work arrangements were only number 3 for men and number 1 for women. And then the opportunities for career progression and competitive wages moved down 1 spot because of that. So a little bit interesting about what was differently relevant to people depending on their characteristics there. And also a finding that among, I guess you could call us millennials, right? People born after 1985, that 38% would consider racial diversity and 36% would consider gender diversity as genuinely important factors when choosing their employer. So if they would have 2 similar employers to choose from, maybe 2 of the big 4 or 2 in the same industry, and one had a better record on diversity and inclusion, or one had a better record in terms of their numbers, who was working there, one was more diverse, then that would make the difference in the decision. That was rather interesting. And I think that mirrors what we saw from you as well, that the equality aspect was of such importance for you. So of course that puts us in a bit of a situation at PwC, right? I mean, we give advice to our clients. We go in and rate other organizations or assess other organizations in terms of how well they're doing on these topics. But we also, that means we have a responsibility to kind of live up to what we preach. So I can tell you a few words about what we're doing in PwC. at least in Switzerland, as far as we see and experience ourselves in the workplace, in terms of diversity and inclusion, to really push that envelope and live our values. So on the top left there, you can see quite a new development that we've had this year. We've developed a diversity and inclusion dashboard in Microsoft Power BI, which is used now by our management board to make decisions about, well, strategic decisions about hiring, about career paths, and particularly about the senior management career paths, based on information about gender balance or age distribution or differences in nationality distribution between the different parts of our business. And what's also happening is that the various heads of department in our organization are going to be held accountable for the numbers that they have in their department when it comes to gender balance in hiring or diversity in promotions, or whether you have a particular group that has a higher turnover than others, perhaps because of a lack of inclusion. Then we're going to see that in the data, and it's going to be pointed out, and people will have the responsibility to fix it, which I think is pretty cool. This is also something that we developed in our team, actually, for our employer as a bit of internal work. Again, adding to the diversity of the kind of things that we do. We're also equal salary certified. Because we offer that service, one of the first things we had to do was go through the process ourselves. And of course, we didn't audit ourselves. We brought in an external audit firm to check us out before we could start telling others what to do and assessing them. We had to pass the test first, and we managed to do that. And the third thing is that we work in our team, in our diversity and inclusion consulting team, we work quite a lot with our internal recruitment team. And PwC in Switzerland is really investing a lot of time and effort in making sure that our recruiters are fully trained in terms of inclusive language, in terms of how to bring in a slate of diverse candidates, and how to mitigate and limit your own bias that you might have towards or against certain people, whether it's because they work like you or have a similar background to you. So we give a lot of training to our internal recruitment team, and we work together with them to try to implement what we call bias interrupters. So in the process, ways to make sure that suboptimal decisions, which don't really reflect who is the best candidate, don't have a chance to get made. I would say those are the three areas where PwC is investing most in trying to live up to what we preach. Here's another exercise for you.
Yeah, we would be very curious as well, the whole group together, basically, with how many diversity dimensions you can come up with. So thinking, for example, beyond gender or beyond nationality, what are other dimensions of diversity that make you unique or the people around you? And yeah, let's see with how many we can come up. I will switch to the Menti for you. You should be able now to just put in keywords. You can put in 3, then you can put in 3 again if you want to add some more. Yeah, so the classical ones would be, what would they be? Gender, nationality, maybe religion, educational background, but there are many. So let's see with how many we can come up with.
Yeah, this is a really big topic actually at the moment. With our clients, whether it's HR teams or whether it's actually strategic discussions, how do we deal with aspects of diversity that are a little bit less visible and not present in the HR data, right? Because in your data about your employees, you can see gender, maybe nationality, probably nationality, age. That's probably about it. But in terms of what makes us different, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we might be able to see or not, or we might be able to collect or not, and how do we measure something that we can't see in our data? It's a big, big, big ongoing subject. Okay, so we've got some answers coming in already. Yeah, a differentiation there between gender and gender identity, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could look at that, how you identify what your biological sex is. Sexual orientation comes into the discussion as well. Yeah, disabilities, including those that are less visible, maybe mental disabilities also there. Political leaning, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It can affect your values and maybe what you consider important at work. Maybe also how important you consider this subject to be. Language, yeah.
Upbringing and class, of course, very important ones.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess you can see a little bit the challenge that companies are facing now. If you think about it, if you were going to go and attack or try to deal with or try to incorporate each of these aspects of diversity one at a time, like, okay, let's fix gender equality first. Okay, then we can do national or racial equality. All right, then we focus on disability. You're never going to get to the end of it. That's a bit of a problem. And that's why we have such a strong link between diversity and inclusion, because if you have a set of behaviors which allow you to get the best out of another person, regardless of their gender or regardless of their ethnicity, and encourage both of you to reach your potential and working together, then that's a set of behaviors that is transferable across all of these other aspects as well. And that's the penny that's beginning to drop for organizations as well, that there is a solution there which can be applied across all this different range of ways we can do different. A few last answers coming in. Just going back to the slides now. A few last points we'd like to make that might be relevant for you.
Okay, so we would be, well, basically what we do here is we thought we give you a little glimpse into the inclusive leadership trainings we do with managers and how to sensitize them to the topic. So we know that you probably already have thought about the topic, or you bring in some intrinsic motivation or enthusiasm about it because you're here today. And I think it's maybe also a little bit a generational thing. I would say, yeah, the younger generations as compared to the average manager are a bit more open to the topic and maybe have more knowledge about it already. But we thought maybe it's just interesting for you to look at this and we're not going to share it, but it's very interesting for your own self-reflection. Think, okay, how many times am I on this slider actually kind of on the default side, what we consider default in our society? And how many times am I actually standing out or I'm not on the default side? And well, basically, of course, this shapes you. It shapes on who you see when you look into the mirror in the morning, and it shapes your experience when you work or also in your free time, of course. And our finding was that people that are standing out a little bit more often, that are more here on the right side, have probably thought about the topic of diversity and inclusion a little bit more. Also, unfortunately, because they made more negative experiences and they felt excluded more often. So that, yeah, many times they have more to say about it because they've done the reflection process beforehand. And then for, I would say, the average manager we work with, if such a category exists, many of them haven't thought about it because it's just not a thing in their life. They don't think so much about, well, am I part of ethnic majority or well, male managers tend not to think so much about their gender. It's just the default option. Yeah, of course, I'm a guy, but then being female or having made or non-binary exposes you to different and potentially discriminatory experiences. So this is just, yeah, one of the exercises we like to do to raise awareness of the topic and to start a thought process and start a discussion, basically. And well, yeah, it showed that managers who thought and reflected about this go about these topics a bit differently in how they lead their team and yeah, in the empathy they show and in the openness they show towards the topic.
Yeah, maybe just from my side, this is one of the few tests where I always score 100%. I'm completely on the left-hand side, so something to be a bit aware of, and as always a reminder for me of how my experience might be different to those around me. And it's also something that we've touched on briefly, but what we explain to managers in our trainings as well is that there is a link between diversity and performance of your team, but it's a link that is not always simple and positive, right? Because if you have a team where people have very similar backgrounds, similar values, similar upbringing, and face similar challenges, then you're probably going to get along together quite quickly and be able to figure out what you want to do, where you want to go, without too much discussion or argument. The problem is that, if you look at that yellow line, the access that you have to different ideas, to different ways to solve problems that you might encounter, or different opportunities that you could think of that you might have missed on your own, you have very few opportunities to do that, or a very limited scope to do that if everyone has a similar point of view to you. So the upside of working in a diverse team where people have different skills, different ways of thinking, different backgrounds, which means different abilities to solve different problems, which means you probably will have someone in your team to solve whatever kind of problem comes up, is much higher, but it needs to be combined with an inclusive culture and inclusive leadership. In other words, you need to have somebody leading that team and a group of people aware in that team of how to get the best out of each other and how to limit that downside of misunderstandings, of time spent discussing around, and conclude on a common objective and find the best way to work there while honoring each other's different perspectives and ways of working.
Exactly. And to kind of illustrate that, we like to look at behavior on a continuum where, well, it's interesting just to have groups of people to reflect about specific cases and where they would basically sit on this continuum. And I mean, the main takeaway from this is that it starts, positive and inclusive behavior starts with very small actions, but so does very negative and inappropriate action. And so what we do when we do these trainings is we really create awareness for the small actions you can do, and you can easily do them in your daily life, so-called microaggressions or microaffirmations that you can easily implement, and that will, yeah, they look small, but they will have a great impact on the culture you have in your team, basically. And I'd suggest to look a little bit closer at examples of microaggressions or microaffirmations. So you can basically read through that list. And for me, this was really an eye-opener, because sometimes it's very hard to pinpoint why you feel welcome, why you feel engaged, why your boss triggers your intrinsic motivation to help, maybe over time, whatever, bring in an idea you may be hesitant to share, but there are these people or these team members that really trigger you to do that. And it's often small gestures, like small micro affirmations, that bring in the best in people. Well, I wasn't so much aware of this, but when I saw this list, I was like, oh, actually, it's really small stuff. I can do that as well. And I can also easily observe it in the team around me to see, well, on which side they are towards me and towards the other team members. Is there anything else you would like to add here, Alex?
Yeah, I would just say that even though I've seen this list quite a few times and I'm pretty aware of it, I still catch myself doing things on the left-hand side more often than I would perhaps like to admit. Because when you're stressed, when you're under time pressure, then maybe, at least to me, it feels like, okay, you could make this nice comment about all the hard work that someone did in this presentation, but it's due in 1 hour and there are 2 things that haven't been done yet. What am I going to focus on? I'm going to focus on the things that haven't been done yet, right? But having that awareness of how this is impacting everyone else in the team, for example, the person who just worked overnight to get the slide deck or the deliverable, whatever it is, to the level it is, helps me to maybe limit some of my initial tendencies that way.
Yeah.
And how this resonates with managers that we train is also that they feel like, oh, you know, it'll be really difficult to change my behaviors. I mean, changing my behaviors sounds like something I don't have time to do. This is stuff you have no excuse not to do as long as you can think of it, because it's so small. It's the quick wins that make people think, all right, you know, maybe this is something that I can start working on and will be of some benefit to me as well.
Exactly. And then we just want to give you a very brief list as a conclusion, basically, before we go into the Q&A, of small tips we also like to share with our workshop participants. On basically small first steps on how to embed an inclusive culture in your team. And that's useful beyond the regular work context, I would say. That's really useful things for maybe your extracurricular activities, at university, in team projects at university, and so on.
Yeah, these kind of seem obvious if you just skim over it. That's the experience I have, at least. But if you really read it, like the first one, listen with the conscious aim of learning something you don't know. That's not that easy to do when you're in the swing of things, I think. So if you really think about what it means to do this and you try it out in practice, I realized that I wasn't doing it, even though it seems, yeah, of course, that's what you would do, right?
Okay, and we have two options to do the Q&A in case anyone of you has follow-up questions about our job or about anything of the content that we mentioned or about PwC in general. You could either just unmute yourself and ask your question here in the plenary. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, or if you prefer just typing your question, you can do that on Menti as well. And other participants also have the option to upvote questions. So if you agree with a question and you also have that thumbs up, and then yeah, we will basically see which are the favorite questions to be answered. But of course, also just feel free to address this directly in the plenary. No need to be shy.
Anyone feeling brave?
Hello together. I have a small question for you.
Go ahead, Patrick.
And my question would be about the equal salary certification. You said you have two different phases and you will only start the second phase if they pass the first phase. So my question is, if a company or an organization comes to you and they drop out of phase one, will you give them the chance to reassign years later, or will you even maybe help them that they can pass phase one?
That's a good question. We have the rule, we never help someone to pass our process. It's designed to be difficult and we don't help them along it. But they do have the option to basically to reapply, to go through again phase one at a later date. So what would normally happen, and we have these cases actually recently often, we would present the results to the organization, say, this is some idea of why you failed, whether it's the gender gap or whether it's because maybe your the data you gave us couldn't explain the differences in pay well enough. We also have those cases. Then we'll tell them, look, you can come back in 6 to 9 months is normal. Having made some genuine changes, maybe you've changed people's pay or you've changed something about your process, and you can try again. But you'll need to pay for the work again, obviously, because we need to redo the work. But most of the time, companies do come back. And in most cases, after the second analysis, they make it through. And what that means is that real people have had real changes to their pay, which I think is pretty cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick.
Okay, we have one really interesting question here, something I think we also keep discussing in our team, and it's how do you handle opposition to affirmative action? So what if we work with clients or individuals that basically oppose this idea of including diverse groups? Maybe Alex, you want to go first, and then I add my comment.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we also have these ongoing discussions about whether a quota is always the right way to go, or is ever the right way to go. That's also like that. The way we try to approach the topic with our clients is to go, look, this is of benefit to you, and it's about getting the best, or like making it a culture that is inclusive to everybody. So the aim is not to disadvantage anybody, it's rather to represent what is genuinely the diversity that is there in the world, right? So let's say if an organization has, the people who are applying to the organization are 80% men, 20% women, can be. That doesn't mean we're going to come in and say, look, you need to always hire 50-50. Because, you need to represent the society or the people who are around you and are interested in you. What we would instead say is you need to hire at least proportionally, so that you represent the people who are coming to you proportionally, because that's how you're going to get, mathematically speaking, that's how it works. But also review how you advertise your jobs and what your website looks like. Because if you want a different mix of people applying, you need to think about why the people who are applying now and are not applying now are making those decisions. So that's how we would work on that kind of topic. What have I missed, Lydia?
Yeah, definitely. And what we do concretely in trainings is also we talk about effectiveness of teams. And many times we see that inclusive behaviors are effective behaviors. And a lot of people that were like hesitant before or a bit critical, they actually agree. And so, yeah, we really, as you said, we try to emphasize, well, the benefit of it for everyone involved, basically.
Something else came to my mind as well. Sorry, Lydia.
No, go ahead.
We also offer trainings on engaging majority groups with diversity and inclusion. So how can you go about making sure that people don't, if you're in a majority group, how do you go about making sure that you don't feel threatened by these kinds of initiatives? Because at the end of the day, it's not about stealing your job or demoting you and doing something horrible to you or something like that. It's about making sure you have an organization which is working for everybody, including you who are in a majority group. So yeah, that's also a way that we tackle that subject.
Yeah. So I will, just for the sake of time, I will go to the next question if you agree. This was voted twice. We have the question if there is the possibility for university students to work with us on topics related to diversity and inclusion, for example, as part of an internship. Alex, did we have interns in the past in our team? I'm not sure because I'm relatively new to the team.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have trainees and we have apprentices who join us from time to time. So PwC has an apprenticeship program. And we also hire sometimes trainees who are still studying. So there's an option there. And we've also had a couple of projects where we collaborated in a research initiative or a study with students, I think from the Graduate Institute, for example, here nearby us in Geneva. We collaborated with a group of, I think it was master's students who were investigating the topic. And we helped with some insights and we helped with some research and guidance about how to do that. So there are a couple of different ways that you can work together with us, either as an employee, let's say, or just on a shared project.
Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, the positive things, you don't need a specific educational background in our team. Yeah, it's really more about your own perspective on the topic and well, passion about the topic, and then whatever diverse people bring in is usually very welcome. So next question would be how to encourage organizations to go beyond gender equality. Really important topic. We get approached by this a lot, by certain organizations recently, of course, well, given the political developments and the Black Lives Matter movement and so on. Especially, firms want to focus also increasingly on ethnic diversity, for example. And while, traditionally, often when firms talk about diversity and inclusion, they talk about gender. So, well, one important way is, of course, the KPIs. So what do they measure and where do they set their goals and how do they measure progress towards these goals? I think this is one topic that we work on a lot and that we advise a lot. What would be another, main topic we address with our clients, Alex?
Yeah, we normally bring a 3-stage maturity model to our clients and say, look, number one, the first step in diversity is that you realize you need to do something about gender. Most of your competitors and a lot of the market has moved on from there. The second level is that you're thinking, okay, this is important not just because we need to comply with the law and maybe because it looks good, but also because we can get some sort of benefit out of it, whether it's about hiring, more diverse talent or winning the war for talent, as they say, getting the best employees and motivating your people more. But there you already need to start thinking beyond just diversity aspects, beyond just gender, and also start looking at inclusion. But the third level of our maturity model, which we encourage organizations to at least move towards if they can't achieve it in one project with us, is where you link inclusion and diversity into your strategic thinking and your strategic key performance indicators. So it's really moving away from just looking at diversity and incorporating this inclusive behaviors aspect, where you tackle all of the elements of diversity together by making sure that you have a culture which values that, which allows that to thrive, right? Where you're genuinely hiring people for merit, and that way you don't need to be tracking, okay, my target is to have this many people from here and this many people who are like this, but rather you're getting the right people because of objective decisions. And then you have a system in place to track, okay, if everything was working as it was supposed to, and we would see proportional representation because that's how statistically talent is distributed, this is what we would see, and you can track, the decisions we're making are either in line with that or not. So you can tweak inside the system as you go through. But really changing that way of thinking to be away from, okay, diversity aspect 1, diversity aspect 2, to how do we put in place a system that resolves the topic for us holistically. That's the journey that we try to take most of our clients on when we're focusing on the D&I consulting perspective.
Great.
Sorry for the monologue there.
Yeah. Just for the sake of time, we have 4 more open questions here through Menti. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question in the plenary?
Yeah, one question that I have is people who are from non-default backgrounds will often have less exposure to a professional environment. So when they enter, they might need some level of hand-holding or training. So what is PwC's approach to that kind of a problem?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that's something that we've been working with that in mind since fairly recently. So what we do is we have quite a strong a buddy program and quite a strong coaching program. So if you have somebody who has on paper what is necessary for the job, right, the right education, and they've gone through an interview process where you have a diverse panel of interviewers in most cases. Well, it should be in all cases. I think it is now in all cases. Then if you have maybe some elements where you're not so sure about, what's the way we work here, what's appropriate, what is not, who can I speak up to, and maybe you're a little bit unsure, then the buddy and the coach are there to help you to answer any of those questions that come up, and to make sure that if there's any aspect of misunderstanding, maybe with another member of the team, then that gets resolved with the involvement of the coach, right? So that's something that's distinct from your line manager, the person who's responsible just for giving you tasks essentially and making sure that you have enough work and that you're involved in interesting projects. The buddy is really there to help you to get up and running, and the coach is there to make sure that if there are any difficulties you're facing, maybe some cultural difficulties or something that you're not used to, not expecting, then that can be taken care of in a thoughtful and a holistic way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of questions on the mentees though, right?
Yeah, we do.
I'll try to be quicker in my answers now.
Or is there anybody in the plenary still before I go back to 1 or 2 of the mentee questions? Okay. So one question is, do companies feel pressure nowadays to be diverse because, for example, of cancel culture, or since people are more aware of it? Definitely. But I would say a big part of the underlying motivations why companies address us is also because they want to attract top talent, and they know that they have to be open to diverse talent if they do that. So of course, it's a bit of an extrinsic motivation as well, triggers them. So reputation and external communication. But it has to do a lot with awareness and with the benefits that leadership sees in having a diverse workforce.
Yeah, I'd maybe hopefully quickly add to that what we try to do is to bridge the gap between people who really are not bought into the subject at all and think it's not necessary, and those who are completely on board with it and abhor anybody who doesn't believe in it. So what we try to do is bring a message which brings those groups together and resonates on both it's definitely the right thing to do and it's a cultural imperative, etc., but also, okay, it's genuinely helpful for you and it's not trying to attack anybody, right? To move away from that stereotype of D&I being about you need to have a certain point of view, or if you have the wrong idea, then you shouldn't come and speak, right? You need to be cancelled. That goes against, in fact, the principles that we're talking about here. So we really try and bring it back to the factual, the scientific, the sensible kind of point of view around, all right, what does this mean for you as an organization? And what does this mean also for employees in terms of their experience as human beings in the organization?
Yeah. And then maybe let's have this as the last question, how to measure or track diversity without being offensive, because most of the data necessary to track it is not available or rather uncommon. Yeah, fully agree, especially in the EU or in Europe, from a legal perspective, there's much data that you can't track. It's very different to the US, where it's very common to track ethnicity, for example, since a while already, also based on well, the history. And in Europe, this is less common. And yeah, also, of course, a legal problem or a legal challenge. I think one answer would be that we don't only track diversity, but we really try to track inclusion through, for example, qualitative surveys where we assess the level of inclusion in the culture, in the firm culture. And that tells us often a lot more than looking at the representation of, for example, specific minorities. Yeah, that would be one way to work around this. Alex, do you have other ideas on how we address this?
Well, other things that companies do is to encourage or even set up sort of representation networks, right? Whether that's around nationality or ethnicity or about your, it's a rainbow network for people who are LGBT plus or supporters of, to allow people who feel comfortable to share that aspect of their identity, to be recognized for it, and also to work towards making that visible as part of the organizational culture. And the other thing is to, once you get into a more mature organization where actually you're not afraid of sharing aspects of your identity for fear of some sort of retribution or discrimination, is to introduce voluntary disclosure so that you have some kind of anonymized general statistic as well of how things are going. But we do try to focus on the qualitative aspect, because at the end of the day, even if you have a perfect distribution of minorities or whatever it is that we're looking at on paper, if people are not working together or are segregated or whatever it may be, then it's not really getting the benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of, let's have this very last question that relates a little bit to what you said. Somebody also asked if there's a maximum of, it's kind of human to surround yourself with people that are similar to you. Fully agree. We had this discussion also, right, Alex? And we can that yes, it's completely normal in your private life to do that and to be in your bubble and your comfort zone and the people who share the same interests and so on. However, in work life, and if we have to solve complex and challenging problems, it really helps to get out of our comfort zone and accept the perspective of the people and engage them basically. So that's where we make a little bit the difference. And yeah, you can have, of course, too much diversity if you don't have enough inclusion. But it's really these two things that need to be interlinked to make the diversity work, however big it is. Yeah. So anybody else from the plenary who would like to ask anything?
Hi, I'd have one question in a more general question. But first of all, thanks for your presentation. That was really interesting, and I got to learn some more stuff about myself, especially where I'm on the spectrum, because I'm also very much on the left there. And my question that is very general would be, what do you guys know about the general hiring policy at the moment at PwC, sorry? Is there any restrictions due to COVID, or do you, because I've heard from other firms like we're hiring for the new normal. So trying to say we're going to hire more.
Around, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm wondering how it looks like from your standpoint?
Well, I can tell you that tomorrow I'm going to an interview with a potential hire, so things are happening still. We have a couple of open positions as well out, so at least from the perspective of our team, I mean, it's still on. We're still hiring, we're still going, we're still hoping to grow. Also because for us, I mean, COVID has really made it a lot clearer how difficult it is to be a truly inclusive organization, even if you say all the right things when it comes to getting people to work together and getting people to feel included over Zoom or whatever it is you use is quite difficult. And particularly if you have different burdens falling on people perhaps of different genders or different positions in their home life of trying to work from home. We are seeing quite a lot of interest and quite a lot of business, to put it in a very pragmatic way, coming out of that. In general, at PwC, I don't think we've been hit so hard by the crisis. We had maybe a couple of difficult months, but as far as I can tell, I don't see why we would change our hiring policy at the moment, and I don't think we have. Does that help?
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I would conclude here. And well, thank you all very much for joining and staying really towards the end, spending your evening with us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate you still being here 20 minutes after the end. So really great. We hope it was helpful for you, and it was great to meet you, great to hear your questions. And well, we hope to see you here in our office one day, right? If that's something you're interested in.
Yeah. Okay, then have a nice evening. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.